Happy New Year. For this first video of the year, it's going to be a deck tech, and I have that coming right up. Welcome to Wizards Whimsy. I'm your host, Patrick. Today we're going over Captain America First Avenger. This is my cEDH deck build. Now this is the deck that I will take to tournaments to play. He is very competitive and he performs very well. He is a Jeskai commander, red, white, and blue, legendary creature, human soldier hero. He's a 4/4. He has two abilities. The first one is throw. You pay 3, unattach an equipment from Captain America. He deals damage equal to that equipment's converted mana cost divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. Then he also has catch. At the beginning of combat on your turn, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to Captain America. It is the first ability that we will be abusing, and there are plenty of equipment that we can use, but we are using low-cost equipment except for a couple. So everything's going to be 4 or less except for one equipment, and that equipment will be a 12-drop. So we're going to go ahead and get into this deck tech with Captain America. We're going to start off with the Planeswalkers. We are running 2 of them. The first Planeswalker is Teferi, Master of Time. He is a 4-drop, 2 generic, and a blue-blue. Teferi, Master of Time comes in with 3 loyalty. You may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn anytime you could cast an instant. So this means that during each opponent's turn, we get to activate Teferi, and he has a +1, which is draw a card, then discard a card. This is very useful in filtering out and trying to get to our key pieces that we need to be able to play to win the game. Also, it has a -3. Target creature you don't control phases out. Now this is very important because this can, get rid of some problematic creatures for basically until that player's next turn. And one of the things that it is, if they play a combo piece like maybe Kennen or anything like that, we can phase him out so that they are not able to activate him until their next turn. And hopefully they won't get a next turn. And then of course you have the -10. Take 2 extra turns after this one. Now, if you tick it up enough, yes, you're going to activate it, but the main focus and the main reason to have this card is to be able to filter through your deck. The second Planeswalker is Teferi, Time Raveler. He's a 3-drop, 1 generic, a white, and a blue. He has 2 abilities. He also has a static ability. Each opponent casts spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. So this shuts off your opponent's counter spells. This is a card that, like, if you're trying to win, that you want to drop down so it protects your turn. Now, he has a plus ability. Until your next turn, you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. And it has a -3. Return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand, draw a card. He comes in with 4 loyalty. Now, he is one of our combo pieces. He goes with Displacer Kitten and a mana positive rock so that we can bounce him back and forth and keep activating that ability to draw into our win con, as well as create infinite mana or pseudo infinite mana. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the lands. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. There's 28 lands. We have a mountain and an island. Those are the only 2 basics. The rest are non-basic lands. There are a couple of lands that are important for this deck. We'll go ahead and take a look at those, but for the most part, it's just lands that will come in untapped that we're able to use. And for the most part, like I said, it's just for our colors for Jeskai. And there are a couple of utility lands, but the whole deck list will be in the description below. I have a link on Moxfield for that, and you can check that out if you want to see the exact lands that I'm running. I got to play this deck a couple weeks back in a tournament for a box of foundations, and I did make the top 4. Actually, I think I ended up in 3rd overall, but I noticed a problem in game 2 that I needed to address. And one of it was being able to do things at instant speed. So this land here, Emergence Zone. Add a colorless or pay 1, sacrifice Emergence Zone, and you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. This is an enchantment land, Urza's Saga. The final ability of it, search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So what's great about this is that you can go get your Mana Vault, you can go get Lotus Petal, Soul Ring, and you can actually tap this in response to that trigger going off so that you float a mana, and then you're able to cast your Mana Vault or your Mana Crypt with that mana. So Urza's Saga is a key land that you want to have in this deck because you are an artifact deck, so you can go get one of your 1-drop artifacts or 0-cost artifacts and put it onto the battlefield. I did put Sunbaked Canyon in here. I can tap Sunbaked Canyon for a red or a white at the cost of 1 life, or I can sacrifice it paying 1 and draw a card. So I want to make sure that I can get to the cards that I need to in order to win. So this is one of the cards that I have in the land base that helps me draw cards. Make sure you check out that link in the description below for the complete deck list, and you'll see what my land base is. And hey, give me some ideas if you see anything that I need to change or add into it that you think will actually help this deck perform better. Leave that in a comment below. So now we're taking a look at the enchantment package. Now there's only 4 enchantments in this deck, and you pretty much know what they are. We have Mystic Remora, then we also have Rhystic Study, then we have Smothering Tithe. Smothering Tithe is really key, especially if you can get it out early to where your opponents can't pay the 2 and you get to create treasure, because the more resources you have, the better off you will be. And we do need to use resources for Captain America's ability. It costs 3 to throw, and any equip costs that we have, that's additional mana that we need to be able to utilize to where we can equip and throw the equipment. Finally, there's Underworld Breach. It is not a Underworld Breach combo. This is just so that if any of our key cards get countered, we have a way to get them back and to be able to cast them from the graveyard. In our sorcery package, we're running 5 sorceries. The first is Jessica's Will. Choose one. If you control your commander as you cast this, you may choose both. Add 1 red mana for each card in target opponent's hand, and exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So again, this is just a great card because hopefully your opponents have more cards in hand than you do, and your commander's out on the field, so you pay 3, and you're hoping that they have more than 3 cards in hand. That way you can net positive the mana that you will be getting off of this. And then exiling the top 3 cards of your library and being able to play them. If you have this in hand and you have a land in hand, make sure that you cast this before playing the land, just in case you flip over a land, because again, you can play anything that is exiled with this. You can actually put it into play. So if a land comes up, you can put it into play. So then your next turn, you'll be able to have another land drop. Savine's Reclamation. This is a 3-drop, 2 and a white sorcery. Return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, you may copy this spell and may choose new targets for the copy. Flashback is 5. Steel Shaper's Gift. It is a 1-drop, 1 white sorcery. Search your library for an equipment card, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. It gets that equipment to your hand. It doesn't go on top of your library. The downside is that it is a sorcery, so you do have to do it on your turn, unless you use some way to actually cast it at instant speed, some way that gives you flash. So I'm also running Red Entomb, also known as Gamble. It is 1 red, search your library for a card, put that card in your hand, discard a card at random. You go get a card you want, and hopefully you have a full grip, and you shuffle it up, and then 1 card gets discarded at random. Most of the time for me, it's always the card that I search for. The final sorcery, it's one of my pet cards. I don't own a Wheel of Fortune, but I do use this card, and I love it if I'm going first and I have this in my opening hand. Winds of Change. It is a 1 red mana sorcery. All players shuffle their hands into their libraries and then draw the same number of cards they originally held. So basically this is a wheel effect, except you're not throwing a bunch of cards into the graveyard. You're putting them back in your deck and you're shuffling up and just drawing a new hand. Of course, your opponents, they have kept hands that they want or felt were good, especially in cEDH. They have some kind of interaction. They have a way to go for their combo or their win line as fast as possible. And there's all sorts of reasons that they keep the hands that they keep. And this is a way to disrupt that. So, going turn 1 and having this opening hand and the mana to be able to cast it, I do it every time. We have a total of 18 creatures in our creature package, and we're going to go over each one of those. Goblin Engineer. He's a 2-drop, 1/2 Goblin Artificer. Whenever Goblin Engineer enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Pay a red, tap, sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Birgi, God of Storytelling. She is a 3-drop, 2 generic, and a red 3/3 legendary creature god. Whenever you cast a spell, add a red mana until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. Now she is key for that first ability because you get red mana anytime you cast a spell. So if you have any 0 drops, whenever you cast those, you generate a red mana. And plus the ability to not lose this mana as steps and phases go, so you can keep that mana up if you plan on using it, say, in your main phase 2 for some reason, or if you need it for some kind of combat trick. Zidra the Dawn Waker actually enables a couple of our combos. This fox is a 3-drop, 1 generic, and 2 either red or white. It is a hybrid mana, so you can use red-white, you can use red-red, you can use white-white. It doesn't matter on that because as long as you're using any combination of red and white, you pay for the color pips of this spell, you'll be able to cast it. It is a legendary creature elemental fox that's a 3/3. It has companion. Each permanent card in your starting deck has an activated ability. Now, we're not using it as a companion. It is a creature that is in the deck. This next ability is what is the main thing for it. Abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. And then it also has pay 1, tap, target creature can't block this turn. Reducing the activated cost is key because Captain America's ability is not a mana ability and it costs 3. So reducing it by 2, making it only cost 1 to activate, and that is very key. Also, something to note is that all your equipment will now equip for 1 with this card out because, again, it doesn't reduce it to less than 1 mana, so you'll always be paying 1 mana for those abilities. So if they cost 3, they cost 1. If they cost 2, they cost 1. If they cost 4, they'll cost 2. So it reduces that activated cost. Now, this also reduces the cost of Basalt Monolith for the untap ability. So when you tap it and generate 3 mana, instead of paying 3 to untap it, you actually pay 1 to untap it. So you can actually generate infinite colorless mana with this and Basalt Monolith. Imperial Recruiter is a 3-drop, 2 generic and a red. When Imperial Recruiter enters the battlefield, search your library for a creature card with power 2 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is a way that we can tutor up one of our key creatures. Stoneforge Mystic is a 2-drop, 1 generic and a white creature core artificer. Now she is a 1/2, and when Stoneforge Mystic enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Now you can pay 1 and a white tap. You may put an equipment card from your hand onto the battlefield. So this is a way that we can go get one of our equipments, and then the next turn we can actually put it onto the battlefield without paying the mana cost of the equipment. So we can save a little bit of mana and maybe use that to actually equip Goblin Welders, a 1-drop, 1/1 Goblin Artificer. It has tap, choose target artifact a player controls, and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolved, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. So they have to sack the artifact that you choose and then return the artifact in the graveyard to the battlefield. Now, you can get rid of any of their mana rocks this way and get something back out that's not a mana rock, or you can get rid of a good mana rock and give them a worse mana rock. And that's one of the things that you can do. But you can also sacrifice, say, a treasure from your field and get back one of your key artifact pieces, because it does not matter about the mana cost. Ragavan is just a great 1-drop legendary creature monkey pirate, 2/1. When Ragavan deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card. So this is a great way that you can get rid of cards in your opponent's deck, or if you have enough mana, maybe you can cast it and actually use that. So that's one key thing about this. But he also generates that treasure, and you can also dash him in. You pay 1 and a red, and you dash him in, attack, hit your opponent, make a treasure, get a card off of their library that can either stay exiled or you can cast it. Then at the next end step, you return him to your hand. Of course, we have Grand Abolisher. He is a 2-drop, white, 2/2. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So this basically makes your turn. So if you can get them out and keep them out, it is great, and it is a way to protect the wins. Now, sometimes you will see players actually just put him out ahead of time in hopes that whenever it gets back to their next turn, that they'll have the resources that they need to actually win the game. Archivist of Ogma is a 2-drop, 1 generic, 1 white, 2/2 halfling cleric. It has flash. Whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. So anytime an opponent is searching their library, you draw a card and you gain a life. So this is another way that we're trying to get to our cards that we need to actually win the game. Fairy Mastermind, being a 2-drop, 1 generic and a blue Fairy Rogue, 2/1, has flash, flying. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. Then you can pay 4, each player draws a card. The Reality Chip. It is a 2-drop legendary artifact creature equipment jellyfish. It is a 0/4. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. As long as the Reality Chip is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. You can reconfigure for 2 generic and a blue. Basically, it will become an equipment attached to a creature. And being able to play from the top of your library as well as your hand, that gives you more resources that you can use. It lets you play lands from the top of your library, and you can cast spells from the top of your library. So you can keep a counter spell on top of your library, playing the cards in your hand, and then when you pass the turn and they go to, say one of your opponents goes on their win line, you can cast that spell from the top of your library. So that is a key thing, to have that extra resource and that extra ability to play cards from other zones. Of course, again, the main thing is trying to draw into our win conditions or draw into ways to stop our opponents from winning, and Esper Sentinel does a good job at that. He is a 1-drop, 1/1 artifact creature human soldier. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. So we do have equipment, so we do have a way to actually buff him up if we need to. So that's a good thing, to have in this deck, because we can increase his power relatively easy. So that's one thing that our opponents have to worry about now, is that instead of having to pay the 1, they might have to pay 3 or 4 extra. So, most of the time we do get to draw a card. Lion Sash, this is another one of the reconfigured creatures. It is a 2-drop, 1 generic and a white. Artifact creature, equipment cat, 1/1. Pay a white, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. Now, you can reconfigure for 2 generic, but Captain America's second ability, Catch, you can automatically just equip this for 0 at the beginning of combat. So, nice little trick that you have there with these reconfigure creatures, because they are also equipment. That gives us extra sources to put on Captain America, and extra equipment that we can actually throw to, hopefully win the game. Displacer Kitten, this is another one of our combo pieces. It is a 4-drop, 3 generic and a blue creature, cat beast. It is a 2/2. It has avoidance. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. We can cast out our little Teferi and return, say, a Soul Ring to our hand. We cast Soul Ring, flicker Teferi, tap Soul Ring for the 2 mana, and then bounce it back to our hand, and then replay it for that 1 mana. And we're able to generate a lot of colorless mana this way, while also drawing cards with little Teferi. And we also have the benefit of little Teferi resetting each time he enters, but shutting down our opponents and making it to where they can only cast at sorcery speed. I was actually looking for this ability, and it took me a while to find it, but I finally did, and can't tell you how happy I am to have this as a resource in this deck. It is Leonin Shikari. It is a 2-drop, 1 generic and a white 2/2 creature, cat soldier. You may play equipped abilities anytime you could play an instant. So now we can actually equip at instant speed, so that when we start generating mana, especially even if it's not our turn, if it's our opponent's turn, we can throw our equipment, reattach it, throw it, reattach it, throw it, all at instant speed. And so this gives us the ability to actually win on the stack with Captain America throwing his equipment. If you have white in your deck, you're going to be running this card. It's Draenith Magistrate. It is a 2-drop creature, human wizard, 1/3. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So it shuts them off of being able to cast their commanders from the command zone. It keeps them from being able to cast anything from the top of their library or from their graveyard. So this shuts down Underworld Breach for our opponents. It shuts down anything that lets them play from the top of their library, or cast something from exile. This is a monster control stacks piece that every deck that has white in it should be running, because this is going to slow your opponents down while not hindering you at all. We have Pure Steel Paladin. It's a 2-drop, white. Whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. It has Metalcraft. Equipment you control have equipped 0 as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. So this, with the Leonin, we are able to equip for 0. We can throw our equipment for 1 with Zidra out. So we can actually do a whole lot in a single turn as far as throwing our equipment with Captain America. The final creature that we have is Polywog Prodigy. It is a 2-drop, 1 generic and a blue 1/3 frog wizard. It has Evolve. Whenever a creature you control enters, that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than Polywog Prodigy's power, draw a card. They're not paying anything, so they can't pay for you not to do it. It is, you do draw it as long as his power is higher than the spell that they cast. We have 21 spells in the instant package, and over half of that has to do with controlling, either countering our opponent's spells or protecting our win cons with counter spells or getting to our win cons. That is what our instant package is made up of. So we'll go ahead and go through that real quickly. First up, we have Flusterstorm. It is a 1 blue instant. Counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 1. It has Storm. So the more spells that are cast, the more copies of this that we'll actually get to use. So we can actually target a spell even if they have open mana. Hopefully we have enough copies of this to where they cannot pay for all of those copies, and we'll be able to counter their spell. Pact of Negation, it is a 0 cost counter spell. It's counter target spell, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 3 generic and 2 blue. If you don't, you lose the game. So this is a spell that if we know we're fixing to get into a counter battle with our opponent, we can counter their spell and expect this one to get countered. We've used no mana resources to it, and we've gotten an additional spell out of their hand for basically 0 cost as far as mana goes. And then we can go into using our other counter spells. Now, another good thing about this is that if we're going for our win and our opponent tries to, disrupt our win any way that they can as far as casting a spell, whether it's a creature-based spell, enchantment, or whatever, we have this spell that's available. And since we're going for our win, we're not really worried about having to pay that 5 mana at the next upkeep, because hopefully there will not be a next upkeep. The spell is a 1 mana counter target instant spell. Now this is utilized a lot to stop our opponent's win conditions or to protect our win conditions. So if our opponents are casting an instant speed spell, here we have a chance to counter the instant spell, and it's only costing 1 mana. So we are trying to utilize the lowest cost that we can for protecting our win lines or preventing our opponents from using their win lines. And the spell is a great counter to have because it's going to counter those instant spells. Fierce Guardianship. It is a 3-drop, 2 generic, and a blue instant. But if you control your commander, it is free. You can cast it without paying its mana cost, and you counter a target non-creature spell. So again, this is whenever we're trying to protect or prevent our opponent's win lines. If we're trying to protect our win lines or prevent our opponent's win lines, this is a great spell, and it costs nothing as long as we have our commander out. There's no downside to it other than the fact that you have to have your commander out. Of course, it only does non-creature spells, so whenever you're trying to counter their spell, it's going for the win, and they're trying to counter your spell, well, this is a free option to counter theirs. Now, there's a good chance that they are also running this spell, so a nice little counter war could incur, and being able to keep your mana resources for other counter spells or other ways to protect your win line or to recur your win line, this is a invaluable tool to have in the deck. Now again, we're keeping the counter spells as cheap as we can, and Swan Song is a great counter spell. It counters target enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell. Its controller gets a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying onto the battlefield. What's great about this, a lot of times you're not going to worry about the 2/2 bird, because again, you're going for your wins or you are preventing your opponents from winning. So giving them a 2/2 bird in place of them actually winning the game, that's a great trade-off. An offer you can't refuse is 1 blue mana. It's counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. Again, the spell has to resolve in order for them to get the 2 treasure tokens. So if they're going for a win line, say Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation, and you're countering Demonic Consultation, well, they're not going to let this spell resolve to get those 2 treasures unless they have Tainted Pact in hand as well. But This is a great counter spell. It's cheap. Takes up 1 mana, 1 blue mana, so you can crack a treasure for it, or if you have an island or any mana source that taps for a blue, you can cast this spell and hopefully stop your opponent's win lines or protect your own win lines. Deflecting Swat, this is another one of those spells that if you control your commander, it's free. Otherwise, it is 2 generic and a red, and you may choose new targets for target spell or an ability. So if there's any spell or ability that is targeting, you can actually redirect that. It's Mind Break Trap. It is 2 generic and 2 blue. If an opponent casts 3 or more spells this turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Exile any number of target spells. This spell will exile any number of target spells, so it's not countering a spell. It is exiling any number of target spells. So if a stack gets really big and there's a lot of spells on the stack, you can actually pop this out for 0 and exile all those spells while they're on the stack. Because the Thassa Oracle combo is so prevalent in cEDH, this is a great card that can stop that. It is Trick Bind. It is 1 generic and a blue instant. It has Split Second, which means that no other spells or abilities can be put on the stack while this card is on the stack. Meaning that if they want to try to counter it, they are not going to be able to because they can't put another spell on top of it. Now, they can activate mana sources, so they can tap their Soul Ring to get mana, tap their lands to get mana. And they can also activate Morph and Disguise because those do not use the stack. And this is counter target activated or triggered ability. If a permanent's ability is countered this way, activated abilities of that permanent can't be played this turn. This card is probably one of the most iconic cards as far as counter spells go, especially in cEDH and in Commander in general. It is Force of Will. It is a 5-drop, 3 generic and 2 blue. You may pay 1 life and remove a blue card from your hand from the game instead of paying Force of Will's casting cost. You counter a target spell. Then with Modern Horizons, whenever it came out, it brought us Force of Negation. It is a 3-drop, 1 generic and 2 blue. If it's not your turn, so that's a key thing. This is only free if it's not your turn. You exile a blue card from your hand, much like Force of Will, rather than pay this mana cost, but it only counters target non-creature spells. The upside is that if a spell is countered this way, it exiles it instead of putting it into the graveyard. So if your opponent is trying to drop a Underworld Breach and you force a negation, you're going to exile that Underworld Breach as long as this spell resolves. The key thing to remember is that it's only free if you exile a blue card from your hand, and it cannot be during your turn. If it's during your turn, you have to pay the mana cost. Now, as far as protecting yourself and preventing an opponent's win line, we have Angel's Grace. It is a 1 white mana. It has Split Second, meaning no spells or abilities can be put on the stack while this spell is on the stack. You can't lose the game this turn, and your opponents can't win the game this turn. So if your opponent goes for the Thassa's Oracle combo line to win, casting Demonic Consultation, you let the Demonic Consultation resolve, and with the Oracle's trigger on the stack, you cast Angel's Grace. They cannot win the game that turn, and you cannot lose the game. So it will pass to you, and then all you have to do is either make them draw a card, or if you can go through your win lines to actually win. Dramatic Reversal is a 2-drop, 1 generic, and a blue. Untap all non-land permanents you control. Ideally, you want to get this under Isochron Scepter. That way you just pay 2 mana to untap all your mana rocks, and then you can start creating infinite mana that way. So that is what this card is for. It's for helping generate infinite mana. That way we can activate Captain America's ability to throw his equipment as much as we need to in order to win. Now, this is another iconic card of Commander, and it's probably used in just about any deck that has blue in it. It is Cyclonic Rift. It is 1 generic and a blue. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. You can overload it for 6 generic and 1 blue, and you'll return all non-land permanents you don't control to their owner's hand. Intuition, this is a great way to get to your win conditions, or if one of your win cons actually gets put into the graveyard, you can get cards that let you get things out of the graveyard, and that's what this card is for. It is Intuition. It is a 3-drop, 2 generic, and a blue. Search your library for any 3 cards and reveal them to target opponent. He or she chooses one. Put that card into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Shuffle your library afterwards. Silence, it's 1 white mana, instant. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. Now, this can be used both for offensive purposes and defensive purposes. So if it's, at your upkeep, you can cast this spell. You're going to either draw out counter spells, or your turn is going to be protected to where they cannot cast spells this turn. Now, if you're doing it for defensive purposes, say during your opponent's upkeep, they cast a silence, you can put your silence on top of that to actually silence them. So basically nobody's casting any spells during that turn. Swords to Plowshare is 1 white mana, instant, exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Now, there are plenty of creatures out there that can stop your win lines, whether they're shutting down activated abilities of creatures or artifacts, or if they're causing some kind of problem preventing you from casting spells from other than your hand, like Draenith Magistrate. This is a great way to remove it because you are removing it from the game entirely. You're not just putting it into a graveyard. Enlightened Tutor is 1 white mana, instant. Search your library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal that card, shuffle your library, then put that card on top of it. So you're going to do this at your opponent's end step before it gets to your turn, and you're most likely going to be going after one of your artifacts. There are a couple enchantments that you would go after, but you're only running 4 enchantments, so for the most part, you're going to be going after one of your artifacts so that you can draw it on your next turn. Mystical Tutor, 1 blue mana, search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal that card, shuffle your library, then put that card on top of it. Again, this is something you're going to do at your opponent's end step, or if you have a draw trigger on the stack, you will cast a spell to go get whatever instance or sorcery that you need. Most likely, you'll probably be going and getting a counter spell. That way you can protect your win attempts or stop your opponent's win attempt. Final Fortune, this is a new add to the deck list. It is 2 red mana. Take an extra turn after this one. At the beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. Now this is basically going for broke. So you're either going to win on that extra turn or you're going to lose. There's no other way around it. So that's one thing that you have to be careful whenever you're playing this spell. You want to make sure that you have a way to protect your win line. That way you know that you're going to win. Otherwise, you'll cast this spell and you'll end up losing the game. So strategic timing of when you play this spell is crucial. Born Upon the Wind, it is a 2-drop, 1 generic and a blue. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. Draw a card. Now, this is a way that we can actually win on the stack, because if we're able to cast our spells, any of our spells, at instant speed, then it gives us the better opportunity to actually win the game and win during one of our opponent's turns. So that giving all our spells flash, it replaces itself essentially with giving you the ability to draw a card. So this is one way that we can actually go to win on our opponent's turn, by being able to cast any of our artifacts or enchantments or anything like that. Even our creatures, being able to cast those during our opponent's turn will actually give us a big edge whenever it comes to actually winning the game. We're running 21 artifacts in this deck, so we're going to go ahead and go through those real quick. These artifacts are enablers. So these first 3 artifacts we're going to go over, they help us get to our win con or progress it in a way that we can actually either create infinite mana, draw a bunch of cards, or play from the top of our library. The first one is Crystal Skull Iju Spyglass. It is a 4-drop, 2 generic and 2 blue. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of your library. Tap at a blue mana. So this gives us the ability to get any legendary lands off of the top of our library and play them, or to cast any kind of historic spell, which is going to be our artifacts or legendary spells. Next up, this has made its way into pretty much every commander deck. There's no reason not to run it. It is such a great card, and it recently got banned in Modern. It is the One Ring. It is a 4-drop. It has Indestructible. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. You can tap, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. So when you play this, you can tap it, draw a card, and put a burden counter on it, and then during your next upkeep, you'll take a damage for that burden counter. And again, you can tap it, put another burden counter, you'll have 2 on there, and draw 2 cards. This card just sees so much play because 1, it gives you protection from everything, so you're not going to be targeted by anything, you're not going to take damage by creatures. They basically have to have something that says, you know, everybody loses this much life or something like that in order to affect your life total until your next turn. Isochron Scepter, this is what enables Dramatic Reversal to actually create infinite mana. It costs 2 mana. It has Imprint. When Isochron Scepter enters the battlefield, you may exile an instant card with mana value 2 or less from your hand. So you exile Dramatic Reversal underneath it, then you may pay 2 mana and tap it. You may copy the exile card. If you do, you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So you're essentially just casting it, you're untapping all your artifacts, so it also untaps Isochron Scepter. So you're able to float mana, pay 2 into this, tap it, cast the Dramatic Reversal again, and repeat that process over and over to generate your infinite mana. 9 of the 21 artifacts that we're running is mana rocks. First up, we have Talisman of Creativity. It is 2 mana. It is tap, add a colorless mana, or you can tap, add a blue or red mana, and Talisman of Creativity deals 1 damage to you. We have Mox Amber. It is a 0-drop. Legendary artifact, add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures or planeswalkers you control. Mox Opal is a 0-drop legendary artifact. It has Metalcraft. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Chrome Mox is also a 0-drop. It has Imprint. When Chrome Mox enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand. You can tap, add 1 mana of any of the exiled cards' colors to your mana pool. Then, of course, you have Soul Ring. It is a 1-drop. Tap, add 2 colorless mana. Lotus Petal is a 0-drop artifact. Tap, sacrifice Lotus Petal. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. And you have Basalt Monolith. This is one of our combo cards. It is a 3-drop. Basalt Monolith doesn't untap during your untap step. You tap, add 3 colorless mana. You have to pay 3 mana to untap Basalt Monolith. So there's several ways that we have in the deck to where we can actually generate infinite mana using Basalt Monolith. That way we can activate Captain America's ability. One of the ways is with Zidra, because it reduces the activated abilities by 2, or using Isochron Scepter with Dramatic Reversal underneath it. Mana Vault is a 1-drop. Mana Vault doesn't untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 4. If you do, untap Mana Vault. At the beginning of your draw step, if Mana Vault is tapped, it deals 1 damage to you. It has tap, add 3 colorless mana. So this will actually help us get out bigger spells, and taking that 1 damage until we get a chance to untap it is not really that big of a deal since life is a resource. So if this is going to get one of our big spells out fast, we want to do that so that we can actually get ahead of the game. So this is one of those cards that, you know, its payoff outweighs its downside. That's a key thing to remember with a lot of the cards. You have to look at what the payoff is versus what the con is of it. So the pro to this is that you're able to generate 3 colorless mana at the cost of 1 mana. The con of it is that you take a damage at each draw step until you're able to untap this thing or remove it from the game. Mox Diamond is a 0-drop. When Mox Diamond comes into play, choose and discard a land card or sacrifice Mox Diamond. So you play Mox Diamond and you have to discard a land card. This is tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. So this is a way that, instead of playing that land on the next turn, you're actually basically getting the benefit of having that land on the turn that you drop this. So on turn 1, you can essentially have 2 mana available. We are running 9 equipment, and each one of these equipment has the ability to help us win the game. So we have Conqueror's Flail. It is a 2-drop. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. So on Captain America, or if you have all of your colors out, you're going to get +3/+3 because this is giving a +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. Captain America has 3 colors. As long as Conqueror's Flail is attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So this is kind of like a silence effect, but it has to be attached to a creature you control. But it is a great way to protect your win con, and it is definitely something that you want to get onto your creature, especially if you're going for your win. Now, as far as throwing equipment, this is probably the best equipment to have to throw. It is Excalibur, Sword of Eden. It is a 12-drop. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of historic permanents you control. So your sagas, your artifacts, and your legendary creatures and your planeswalkers, they all reduce this cost. So you could essentially cast this for 0. Equipped creature gets +10/+0 and has vigilance. You can equip to a legendary creature for 2 mana. What's great about this is Captain America's catch ability. You can actually equip this for free. At the beginning of combat, you can catch this with Captain America, meaning you get to equip it for free. And then you can pay 3 mana to throw it and deal 12 damage divided however you choose among any 3 targets. So you can essentially hit somebody for 12, you can remove a creature or anything like that. So if there's any problematic creatures or planeswalkers on the field, you can divide this damage up between any number of up to 3 targets. Mithril Coat is a 3-drop. It has flash. It is indestructible. When Mithril Coat enters the battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. Equipped creature has indestructible. So if someone is going to try to destroy Captain America, notice I said destroy, not exile. They're trying to deal damage that will destroy him and cause him to die. You can flash this in, and when it enters the battlefield, it will automatically equip to Captain America. This is probably one of my favorite cards to have in this deck. It is Basilisk Collar. It is a 1-drop. Equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink, equipped for 2. So put this on Captain America, and then whenever you're throwing any of the other equipment, Captain America is dealing that damage. It's not the equipment dealing the damage, it is Captain America dealing that damage. So you can put 1 damage on, up to 3 creatures with this attached to Captain America, and it will kill those creatures unless they have indestructible. And you also gain that life. Hammer of Nazan, it is a 4-drop legendary artifact equipment. When Hammer of Nazan or another equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach that equipment to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has indestructible. It does have equipped for 4 mana. Now, hopefully we will never have to pay that equip cost, but if we do, it will use up some of our resources. Now, what's great about this equipment is that whenever it or another equipment enters the battlefield, you get to attach it to a creature you control. So this is getting rid of the equip cost of any equipment that you cast. Mjolnir Stormhammer is a 4-drop legendary artifact equipment. When Mjolnir enters the battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. Whenever equipped creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls and put a stun counter on it. Then Mjolnir deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of tapped creatures that opponent controls. This is in here basically for flavor. There's probably other equipment that I could run, but Captain America and basically Thor's hammer, there's no reason not to have this in there. It does automatically equip to Captain America or any of our other legendary creatures as soon as it enters the battlefield. It is a 4 mana cost, so if we throw it with Captain America, we're able to deal 4 damage divided up between 3 targets. Winged Boots is a 2-drop, 1 generic and a blue artifact equipment. Equipped creature has flying and ward 4. You pay 1 to equip. What's great about this is it gives protection from spot removal because they'll have to pay an additional 4 mana to target whatever creature we put this on. Lava Spur Boots is 1 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has haste and has ward 1. It has an equip cost of 1. So again, this gives our creature haste, it gives it +1, and it also gives it ward 1. So that does actually matter because anytime you're forcing your opponents to spend additional resources to deal with anything that's on your board, it's a good thing because if they're using those additional resources, then they're not able to progress as far as they would like to. Shield of War and Peace, also known as Sword of War and Peace, it is a 3-drop. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from red and from white. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, this equipment deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in their hand, and you gain 1 life for each card in your hand. It has an equip cost of 2. The dream is being able to throw this shield at each of your opponents and win the game using just this shield. So that's one of my main goals for this, is to actually be able to win the game using the Shield of War and Peace. So that is the complete deck. I do have a link on Moxfield and it is in the description below. So go ahead and check that out whenever you get a chance to, and definitely make sure that you leave a comment and let me know what you think about this deck tech for Captain America and using him as a cEDH commander. I definitely want some feedback from you. Let me know what your thoughts are. Is there anything you think I should change or take out and add? Definitely want to hear that. As it is right now, I'm pretty happy with how the deck is running and how it is built, but I'm always open for more feedback. Thanks for checking out this video. It means a lot to me you took the time to look at it. Hope it gives you a new look at Captain America First Avenger and exactly how competitive that he can actually be. This is my pet deck. It's probably the deck that I'm going to spend the most time on, trying to make it as competitive as possible to play in cEDH tournaments. Now, I do have another deck tech with Captain America up that, asking for the community to have some input into how they would build them. But this is my build of how I want to play him and how competitive I think he can be. I'd love to hear your comments on, what you think of this deck and if you play it or if you take it to a tournament and try it out. I'd also love to hear what kind of decks that you're planning on building, especially coming up this new year. And is there anything that you're looking forward to coming out this year? And if you take a look at the description, you'll see that there are links to Amazon with some Magic products. If you use any of those links to purchase any items, I do get a small commission at no cost to you. So while you're reading the description and checking out and leaving comments, go ahead and hit on a couple of those links and see if there's anything that tickles your fancy. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe button. And until next time, keep slinging those spells.